For anyone just joining, this is Lance Oppenheim, who's the director of Some Kind of Heaven, the film that you've hopefully just had a chance to catch. Um, so I guess my first question, so you've already said earlier that you are from Florida and you're currently in Florida with your family. Did you become aware of the villages, early in your life and then decide to make a film about it? How did that process go?
Yeah, I feel like if you're from Florida, then you're more than likely to have heard about the villages. I had heard about it when I was like 12 years old, maybe. Um, I'm from a different part of Florida. I'm from South Florida, but it seemed like on like a slow news day, which was maybe once a month, twice a month maybe. I would there would be these kind of these news stories, all these sort of salacious headlines that would kind of come from the villages and suddenly find their way in like the South Florida newspaper. And I was always really fascinated by it as I think there was something really interesting about like this kind of the way it was being talked about, this hedonistic sort of last resort, this paradise that people were moving into. I grew up like so close to where my grandparents were living in that retirement community. So I had a very, I knew very quickly in kind of learning about the place that this wasn't sort of your traditional retirement community. This was like a retirement city. This was like a place almost like a utopian experiment, this place that was designed to simulate like what the 1950s looked like and felt like, even though it never really, like, their version of that, whatever that time period was, didn't exist. It's like literally the stuff that you see in like the beginning of like Edward Scissorhands or Blue Velvet, this white picket fence kind of dreamy vision of America. And I left Florida. I went to college in Massachusetts, and while I was there, I became sort of obsessed with it again. I think like I was learning all about, um, I think I had read an article that was talking about basically how I think they had hit 120,000 people that lived in the city, which was basically like making it larger in square mileage than the size of Manhattan. They had just consumed another county. And I was like, this place just continues to mushroom and grow. And everyone who seemingly chooses to live there and kind of like ensconce themselves inside of this palm fringed bubble for the last however many years of their lives, um, they're not from Florida. They're from all, they're basically like moving from wherever they are. Some people in the Midwest, to basically isolate themselves in this fantasy. So I became really interested, I think, from that place of wanting to make a film about that world. Knowing kind of how racially homogenous the place was, the vision unto itself was such a conservative one as well. I was really interested in kind of trying to find people who were outliers of that place, who kind of, would help me understand it from a different vantage point. And yeah, that the question I think very quickly kind of became like, all right, I bought into this fantasy. I don't like it. I don't want to be here anymore. I can't move out. What do I do? I literally have 10 years or maybe a little bit more to live. And that existentially was such an interesting question to me, and kind of sort of was the way I was able to start to think about how a film could work. The people who kind of were going through like really, real problems in a very like unreal place.
Yeah. Well, and before I ask my next question, I just want to mention anyone that has any questions, you can submit through the Q&A thing in your screen. But I did want to ask, just as a follow up to that, how did you find these four subjects of the film?
Well, so I spent probably more or less probably like off and on two and a half years going back and forth to the community. I when I first got there, I met each of them in different places, and for a long time we were filming with, we were throughout the process, really up until probably the last 2 or 3 shoots, we were filming with a lot of subjects, and a lot of their stories you can kind of see, or some of the portraiture that exists at the beginning of the film, were kind of came from those other subjects. But I met each of them in very different places. I met Barbara at an acting club, actually, like my first night while I was in the villages. She was like the only person who was seemingly kind of just like there. She was observing, but she wasn't participating. She looked really sad. And I introduced myself to the club, and this was sort of my way of like trying to get into the place. I didn't know anyone who lived there. I just would more or less show up to these clubs and kind of invite myself to places and then like try and talk to the organizer and then basically introduce myself and then at least attempt to sort of make like allow them to introduce me or give me sort of a moment where I could address the club as a filmmaker who didn't know who he was doing in this place, but I was trying to figure out a story. If you have stories, please talk to me. I'd love to hear them. And after I kind of gave that spiel, Barbara came up to me and was kind of just almost just delivered to me a really more, you sort of hear it in the film, but just this her story, how she got there. She wasn't happy living there. She didn't want to be there anymore. When I first met her husband was still alive, and he was in a really like horrible sort of battle with a really debilitating illness, and what that effect was on her. So we had started filming with her for a while, and while her husband was still alive. Dennis, I met at a singles club. I don't even know how he got himself invited there, but there was like a Villages singles club, and he gave me a business card that said celebrity handyman and personal companion for hire. And I had like literally no idea what that meant or what that was. I thought it was a joke. And when I first met him, he was actually living with someone. So I actually didn't even really know, he was kind of, when I first met him, he was really interested in telling me all these sort of like raunchy stories about his previous life and his sexual encounters. And I don't know if you've seen Being John Malkovich, but it was kind of like that vibe of Lester from Lester Corp, like sitting down John Cusack to be like, I love these kinds of people, and let me tell you about my sexual heyday in 19 whatever. And I was just like, okay, like, cool, thanks. And then time went by. I ended up reconnecting with him probably a year after I met him. And that was when I actually found out he was driving this van and was actually like the presentation of who he was sort of revealed itself, and he was a lot more forthcoming about like what he was there and what he was doing. And then Reggie and Anne, I met Reggie on the dance floor of like a singles bar that was basically like almost like kind of resembles like a Chili's by day, and then at night it turns into this place where like all the singles go to dance and party and have fun. Reggie, I was filming with someone else, and Reggie was wearing these like strobe gloves that just kept like they were making tons of noise and lights, and it was like kind of distracting from what we were shooting. And I was like, who is this guy? And he kept making his way into our shots. He was also doing Tai Chi on the dance floor. And eventually I just was like, hey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but we're filming with this other person. And he basically was like, on the subject of your film, you need to be shooting with me, and he kind of then like gave me his whole story. And then, we were filming with him for a while before I actually even realized that he was married to Anne, because he didn't told me about her. And when I met Anne, I was like, oh my God, like that's, it took a little bit of convincing, just because I think she was, she's a lot more quiet than Reggie, and she isn't someone who is, I guess, as extroverted and maybe would as be entertaining of a documentary film crew following them or their lives around for so long. But I think eventually, sort of the way we were working together was also I demanded a lot of transparency and commanded a lot of just, I think like breaking down the walls of what like a verite movie would be like, where you're stealing moments and kind of capturing them and putting them in a movie after. Like with Anne, I had to very truthfully just be like, this is why I'm following you guys. I'm so fascinated that you are both you've been married this long, but you are both in these like completely different worlds now, that you don't share any of the same interests. How do you guys actually work? How does your relationship work? How do you make it, why are you in it? Are you still happy? And I think those are the kinds of questions that I think both of them had very different answers to. But also I think in some ways it kind of became like therapy, or I was, I felt like I was like an honorary, family member that was kind of there to talk to them and help them figure out things. And I don't know, it was very weird and nice and familial, and that was kind of how that all happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to ask, like, and especially as such a young person, was there any sort of like suspicion of like, well, why are you, why are you making this movie about older people, and how did you sort of win? I mean, everyone at the villages, but particularly the four subjects, how did you win their trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think like literally if if you're not there with a film camera and you are, under the age of like, 55 and, probably more so in the ages between like 20 and yeah, if you're under 30 years old and you're kind of walking around there, I think most people either immediately assume that you're someone's grandson, or they imagine you to be sort of an outsider who's like an alien, So I would always kind of get like crazy stares, even when I wasn't wielding a camera. Obviously, when I had the camera with me, it was like even crazier. Like I learned very quickly with my crew that like, I guess what you would normally assume, in an attempt to kind of like capture life, as is, unvarnished and authentically, I learned that you couldn't just basically like plop a camera and just start recording things. It just like life in the villages didn't cooperate that way. Everyone seemed to be really performative. So what we had to do was we kind of leaned into it. And that was actually an interesting, I think, way of gaining trust was kind of being almost like I would explain my aims, what I was trying to capture, who I was, what I was doing. I wasn't there to kind of put out into the world the same sorts of stories that have been known about the villages before the election cycle, which was usually about, you know kind of, I think, more judgmentally looking at the ways people were living lives there. I was just really curious. um, and I think, that the level, we were shooting everything on tripods, so I kind of always had to be like, all right, this is what we're going to do. I'm trying to capture how you would normally go about things. I'm going to set up a shot and then I'm going to shut up and I'm not going to do anything. Just please do what you normally do. And sometimes that would work and kind of give us these like sort of strange and amazing compositions. And other times it was actually like more of, I would have to sort of interview people through each other. I would, there'd be two people in a frame and I'd be kind of asking one of them a question, and that would kind of lead to a natural conversation between everyone. But it definitely took time, and it wasn't something that was just like instantaneously like, I'm going to buy a drink or buy a meal and we'll go out to dinner, we'll have coffee. I think, the other thing that comes to mind too is that I was just graduating from college. I started working on the film while I was a senior in college. And I think there was there was also, I think, like culturally there was something interesting. I guess, Anne in the film says it. It's like when you live there, it's like going back to college. You have all these clubs, you have all these sort of, unstructured free time where without classes where you can kind of roam around and be free. And I think that actually kind of helped. It was disarming to some people in a way that I was, that I was kind of, they were trying to sort of return to the moments of life that I was kind of actively experiencing in some ways. And weirdly, I think like a lot of the questions that I was existentially thinking about my life, what I would do after college, what my life would look like, I was in a relationship, I wanted to make the relationship work. It wasn't working. I had all these questions that I could see was sort of happening in other people's lives too while they were there. So there was almost like a transfusion of, age didn't end up actually mattering all so much. It was really just about, being able to kind of hang with people. And then finally, like, yeah, I think it also speaks to the thesis of hopefully what the movie feels like. It's not a movie in my mind about old people. It's just a movie about people who are, no less like filled of desire or complex or anything like, you or I are. We're, and I think that's kind of an image or that's not really afforded to the elderly oftentimes, which I feel like when you think of other movies that deal with the elderly, it almost like a lot of them seem to, appear to kind of like attempt to defang them and make them appear much more docile and, that they figured everything out. And that was sort of the opposite of what I wanted to do with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that completely comes across. And I was struck by that. Like it feels like a way more nuanced portrait of getting older, and as, yeah, a more universal portrait of just being a human being than what you go into it sort of expecting, which is a sort of, a portrait of just old people living in this wacky retirement community. Could you talk a little bit sort of about the visual style of the film? It feels like, I mean, the entire thing's very beautiful, but that there are these segments that are more kind of choreographed, which feel like sort of asides from the rest of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of how I think like one of the first things that came to us before we even really figured out fully how, what I guess what narratively we were tracking. We became sort of obsessed with, and by we I mean David Bullen, the cinematographer, and I. We were just trying to find ways to, riff off of sort of the reality of the place. How do you, a place that kind of defies reality elsewhere? It's a bubble. They have all of their own sort of restaurants, and they have their own news station. It's like there's kind of when you bring a camera in there, we wanted to sort of feel that kind of like that reality as we may normally see it in a documentary, or sort of the tenets of how the aesthetics of reality look in a documentary should feel different. We wanted to kind of like bring people into the world, and that's also something that we did through sound. We wanted to make this a really immersive portrait of a place that, when it starts, I think you can kind of feel some of the distance between the camera and some of the subjects, like some of the club portraits, which were shot earlier in the film. And I think that honestly was reflecting like how we were feeling when we were there. We were so sort of struck, and we were looking at some of these clubs and like some of the landscapes almost as if they were alien portraits. But then as we started to get to know people more, and as we got to, as we kind of gained more trust, and trust was built between us and the subjects, the camera we started to be able to kind of move in closer and get to like more of an interior or intimate sort of the interior worlds of these subjects. So I think that was something that, to your point of just like talking about maybe the sequences that are like Dennis when he's at the pool and he's looking for the woman to that he wants to shack up with. Like, I wanted there to be those moments where we could sort of live inside of the dreams and the hopes and the desires of the people there. And I felt like, that's not something you can just do in any, in every documentary. I think like to me, it needed to be justified by either the sort of situation at hand, or by the setting. And I think in like a case like that, it almost feels more like a music video where you're, or like a scene from like The Swimmer, the Burt Lancaster movie, where you're kind of in these, hallucinatory something or other, something that feels real, but also feels a little set up in some way. And I liked sort of the tension between those moments. And I think the other thing too is that like in those moments, the kind of amazing thing was that I think we found a way to get to like truer and more real sort of moments with our subjects when we had set things up more than when we were actually just letting things record. Like when I would actually, first, for example, like that sequence with Dennis at the pool, it was very much like, it was very much like I would set up the shot, and I kept sort of literally zooming in and zooming off, and I would be like, all right, talk about this subject, and I would kind of call things out. And then finally, I just kept, doing it over and over again, the zooming, and hoping that we would get sort of a passage of a conversation we could use. That, from there, once we kind of had that moment, we were able to kind of like riff almost like jazz music and kind of figure out the rest of the sequence. We did the conversation, and then we would shoot the zoom right after on Dennis looking. So it was almost like, some of the more heightened moments were always coming from a place of like, something real transpired, or a conversation happened that was, that was not directed at all. And then like out of that, we would kind of try and build out a sequence. And I think like through the artifice of those sort of moments, we were able to get to something that felt more real, which also felt very, I think, in keeping with like our experience of what the place was like, just to be and exist in that world there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is there actually a club of just women named Elaine, or had you independently met each of them and then?
No, that's real. That's real. Yeah. It's the club is called Elaine is our name, as they say in the film. It's just a group of women named Elaine who get together to talk about not Elaine related things, but just, politics, coffee.
It must be a very particular like subset of women named Elaine though, because it's not a name that, is common among like women under a certain age. So it kind of
And that's the thing that's so interesting about like naming anybody really, right? Like it's so interesting to think that like Elaine at a certain point in time, that was like the popular name to name somebody. You know, even like my sister just had a baby, and I'm like, you should go to like the 1940s or 30s or 50s, like name something there. It's probably going to come back in style in like several years. You know, our names are probably going to feel like old people's names. Hopefully we get to that point in our lives that
Totally.
many
Yeah.
of these subjects are in. But yeah, I mean, there's an amazing. I wish I could like screen share it, but there's a the email I sent to the one of the sort of the leader of the Elaine group. Her response to me was she CC'd like all 60 Elaines, so it was like Lance from like 65 Elaines being like, we welcome you to film our meeting on this day, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. I had no idea what to expect.
Yeah, that's pretty surreal. Well, so have any of the four main subjects of the film, did they have a chance to see the finished film yet? And what were their responses to it?
Yeah. So, I mean, this film, we were supposed to, I can kind of walk you through like the timeline. We finished shooting this film a little bit before December of 2019, of this past year. And I showed a rough cut, and I showed sort of the final cut, and then we played Sundance, and then the film played some Florida festivals right around the time like COVID was happening and starting to shut everything down. But I mean, I think like to be honest, I was extremely nervous. I think like that's a common thing, whether you're like a documentarian or a journalist, no matter what you're doing when you're making and you've been entrusted to tell someone's story, and you've been graciously sort of given people's time. You don't want to betray them, and you don't want to make them look foolish. I think that's like the easiest thing you can do in a movie is make someone appear foolish. So I was nervous, especially I think with Anne and Reggie's storyline, story in the film. It's a really sensitive thing that they go through, and I wanted them to, I was worried. They knew what we were filming, I was worried like seeing it would be a strange experience for them. But thankfully, I mean, I think they saw in a lot of ways how the movie was developing. They saw, from one of the cuts to then the final cut to then like seeing it again on a bigger screen. I think because we were shooting the film in sort of the way I was describing, where it wasn't necessarily us just shooting like flies on the wall, where we would just capture moments, and have them mic'd up when they didn't think we were filming, because we weren't doing that, and we were really kind of instructive, and we would be setting up these shots, and the camera at times was like inches away from their faces. They were very aware. It was interesting to see. I think they were more kind of fascinated by like how their stories fit in with these other stories. And one of the kind of amazing things that has happened actually as a result of, the film, Dennis and Reggie have become like lifelong best friends, which is hilarious. They both were looking for friends, outside of their everyday circles. And and like Anne knows Barbara, Dennis knows Anne, and like it kind of became this sort of funny, like family of sorts, where I think, in a way, because everyone was sort of performing like a version of themselves on screen, they all felt like they had ownership in the movie, and that this was sort of like an artistic collaboration and creation that we've all sort of born together. So it was great. I mean, I think like a lot of the fears that I had initially were sort of put to bed as soon as, everyone saw the initial cut, and, we were able to kind of discuss it and hear what everyone was feeling, and what was working, what wasn't working, what things made them feel less comfortable, what things made them feel fine. And we were able to sort of tweak it from there.
Yeah, I mean, that is so amazing, because it seems like it's a project that so easily could have felt condescending or like, laughing at its subjects instead of sort of sympathizing with them in their struggles. But it speaks to the quality of the filmmaking for sure, that no one felt like they had been revealed to be something that they're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, honestly, it's like, yeah. And I think a big part of that is just the editing of the movie, and that, is a testament to Daniel Garber, who had edited the movie with me. I think it's something that is in his marrow and his bones. He's a wonderful editor, but he's also a wonderful person. He came, to the villages while we were shooting because I wanted him to meet the subjects and like understand the responsibility that we all were sort of bearing. We didn't, and I think to Dan, one of the things that was important to him as we were finding it, and what was very much, the movie that you will watch for 5 minutes and then turn off is the movie that is what you're sort of describing, the movie that is more of a like carnival show of just eccentric buffoons. And to make anyone into, I think even right now, I think with like the way in which politically the villages has been reshaped and just the amount of craziness that has come out of there right now, I think like the easiest thing you could do to any single person that lives anywhere really is to make them look like, look foolish. I think everyone is sort of given, I think it's important that most people are given sort of a deeper look or a deeper understanding at what makes them tick. Because I think especially with that generation of people, especially right now, given COVID, it's like, people's dreams and desires and attempts to like better their lives, they don't just stop when you turn 68. Those are things that you kind of constantly are searching for and striving to find, and those answers constantly change, and those questions still remain just as scary when you're at that age. And that was, that may not be like so novel to people who are currently at that level of time. But that was something that was very striking emotionally to me that I kind of, I couldn't get out of my mind, and was sort of the thing that was guiding us to make the movie the way we did.
Yeah. Well, and so you've already mentioned a little bit about the subjects' lives since you wrapped, but have you kept in touch with them, and have they all been doing okay, especially obviously given COVID and everything that's going on?
Yeah. Thank knock on wood. Thank God everyone is fine. Yeah, I mean, I speak to Reggie and Ann and Barbara and Dennis probably like once every 2 weeks. So I'm very much like constantly in contact. I actually just went back up to see a bunch of them about 2 weeks ago just to say hi outside. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like one of the things that's, that I think when you make a film like this and you're sort of in people's lives as intimately as we were, you can't just sort of you can't just sort of say it's done, the movie's done and that's it. I think like these are lifelong sort of friendships that I've built with these people. Not just me, it's like also with my DP and my sound recordist and Dan, my editor, even my composer, like got to know all the subjects. Like, I think it was, I wanted to make this in a way that was, and I've made short films before where I think that the dynamic isn't this way, where you're just sort of, where you are in a place for only 5 days and you only get to know someone as much as those 5 days sort of allow you to. This was a while, this was a long time that we all spent together. Obviously, like the dynamic of COVID has reshaped the villages to some degree. I think like there is, I'm honestly sort of surprised that the place, and I'm glad the place hasn't been hit as badly as I think some may have imagined it would. But it's different. And I think that, I think when we started shooting and as we were finished shooting, there's a, kind of an entirely different sort of climate that's happened there now, that I don't think is so surprising if you were to watch this film, when you kind of look at the way the place is architected, or even you hear the passages where Richard Schwartz is talking about how the dream was sort of formed. I mean, it's a very sort of conservative idea of trapping people inside of like what is basically the Ronald Reagan, like Good Morning in America commercial. It's like that, all of those sort of ideologies are kind of there and warped. And I think like since we've wrapped the film, they've just become all the more dangerous. So in some ways, I'm hoping that when people see this movie, I think they'll be able to connect with a lot of the people who live there that don't believe in those things and are, just sort of attempting to exist in what they thought was a very different what they thought was a very different version of paradise. I think what we're seeing right now is like, that is definitely very much not the case. Like that place is, I feel like anything but a paradise, I guess. But some people may see it as that, and that's sort of, that's what we tried to kind of, with the title of the film, at least call that paradise into question. Some people may identify the place as a heaven, and some people, don't. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, so now that, I mean, you've mentioned that this is a project that you've been working on since you were in college. Um, it must be strange to have finally sort of like wrapped that and put that to bed. But what are you working on now? I'm sure COVID also probably changed some of your plans in your life, but what do you have in store?
Yeah, I mean, like everyone, it's like, yeah, COVID has done a lot. I mean, honestly, right now I'm trying to be a good uncle. There's a newborn baby in my house, which is nice. I'm working on a bunch of different stuff. Hopefully some will happen soon. Working on some fiction stuff, a fiction film that that I kind of was starting to work on before we actually even had finished wrapping. And then, yeah, some other sort of Florida-based documentary projects that would kind of that deal. I think that's sort of the thing that I'm kind of constantly obsessed with and attempting to sort of find in these stories. I fantasize about life all the time, and I feel like sometimes I get trapped in my own fantasies, and I feel like there's a danger to that, and I'm always sort of fascinated by people who kind of, almost like in a Philip Roth character or something in that book, The Counter Life. These are like, I'm fascinated by people who are willing to throw away so many parts of their lives in striving to get to this sort of fantastical world, or sort of a worldview where they can kind of cut out everything that feels negative and just remain in the positive. And I feel like, yeah, like scarily, I feel like that's like a growing majority of our country is kind of becoming that way.
Well, in Florida, I would imagine has more than its fair share of those.
Oh my God, yeah! Just you spend so much time in the sun, you kind of start to melt. So who knows? Hopefully there will be more movies that I can make soon.
I certainly hope so. But in the meantime, I should say, for anyone who doesn't have a chance to see the film in the festival, Some Kind of Heaven will be released by Magnolia Pictures soon. I think later this year, or early 2020.
In January, so
January.
It'll be out soon.
Cool. So yeah, so everyone at home, tell your friends. Well, Lance Oppenheim, thank you again for sharing the film with us and for taking the time to talk tonight.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice I really appreciate you guys hosting the film, and it's an honor to have it played. There's so many good movies this year, so if you're not watching my movie, please go see some other ones, but also please watch my movie too. I'd love it. It'd be great. And support Philadelphia Film Society.
Woo! Thank you for the plug. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.